My sister called me nobody special at her engagement party, right in front of 200 guests, including foreign diplomats and society elites. Said I was just the adopted charity case who didn't belong with real family. But what she didn't know was that the distinguished man in the corner, the one she'd been desperately trying to impress all evening, Ambassador Nathaniel Ashworth, had been watching me the entire time. And when he finally approached our table, he didn't introduce himself to her. He looked directly at me and said 5 words that shattered her perfect little world. "Hello, Lydia. I'm your father." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lydia Hawthorn, and this story isn't just about family secrets. It's about what happens when someone who's spent their whole life making you feel invisible suddenly realizes you're the only person in the room they should have been seeing all along. Let me take you back to 6 months ago, to what should have been one of the happiest nights of my adoptive sister's life. Cassandra Whitmore was announcing her engagement to Jonathan Aldridge, heir to the Aldridge shipping fortune. The venue? The Crystal Ballroom at the Meridian Hotel in downtown Belmont, the kind of place where champagne cost more per bottle than most people make in a week. I'd been living with the Whitmore family since I was 8 years old, after my mother died in what everyone called tragic circumstances. The Whitmores took me in through their church's charitable foundation. Patricia Whitmore, my adoptive mother, always made sure everyone knew it was an act of Christian generosity. "We gave that poor child a home when no one else would," she'd say, usually right in front of me, as if I were deaf rather than just disposable. Cassandra and I grew up in the same house, but we might as well have lived on different planets. She was the golden daughter, blonde, charming, destined for greatness. I was the project, the good deed, the reminder of their family's charitable nature. When she got a car for her 16th birthday, I got a lecture about being grateful for my bicycle. When she went to Hillcrest Academy, the elite private school, I went to Belmont Public High School. The message was always clear. She was family. I was something else. But I worked twice as hard for everything. Scholarships to Meridian University, where I studied international relations and became fluent in 4 languages. A master's degree in diplomatic studies that I paid for myself through 3 part-time jobs. By 25, I was working as a cultural liaison for the Belmont International Trade Council, facilitating relationships between local businesses and foreign delegations. That's actually how I ended up at Cassandra's engagement party in the first place. The Whitmore family wanted to make connections with the diplomatic community, and I was their bridge. "Lydia can introduce you to the right people," Patricia had said when planning the guest list. For once, my expertise was useful to them. The evening started typically enough. Cassandra floated around in her designer gown, custom Valentino, as she mentioned to every guest at least twice, while I wore a simple black dress I'd bought on sale 3 months earlier. I spent the cocktail hour doing what I always did, facilitating introductions, translating conversations, making sure the international guests felt welcomed and understood. That's when I first noticed him, Ambassador Nathaniel Ashworth, recently appointed as the British envoy to our region, stood near the corner of the ballroom. Distinguished silver hair, kind eyes, impeccable posture. I'd read about his appointment in the diplomatic briefings I received through work, but I'd never met him personally. What struck me as odd was how often I caught him looking in my direction. Not at Cassandra, who was commanding attention at the center of the room, but at me. Every time I glanced over, his gaze would find mine across the crowded ballroom. It was unsettling. Not uncomfortable exactly, but intense, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. The evening took its predictable turn when dinner was announced. The Whitmores had arranged for a formal seating chart. Diplomatic protocol, Patricia called it, though I suspected it was more about showing off their important connections. I was seated at table 12, near the back, with some junior consulate staff and local business partners. Cassandra's table, table 1, naturally, was positioned front and center, surrounded by the most prominent guests. That's when it happened, the moment that would split my life into before and after. I was explaining the intricacies of trade agreements to a German businessman when Cassandra's voice cut through the ambient conversation. She was standing now, champagne glass raised, Jonathan beside her with a practiced smile.
"I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease. "This celebration means everything to Jonathan and me, especially having our real family and closest friends here to share it with us." She paused, scanning the room, her eyes landing on me with a look I'd seen countless times before. The look that said, I was tolerated, not treasured. "Of course, we also want to acknowledge those who've helped make tonight possible. Our staff, our vendors, and—" another pause, another pointed look. "Our charity cases who've become part of the extended family over the years." The words hit like a slap. Charity cases. Plural, though I was clearly the target. But she wasn't done. "You know, people sometimes ask me what it's like having an adopted sister, and I always tell them the same thing. Lydia's nobody special, really, just someone we took in out of kindness. She's done well for herself, considering her circumstances, but at the end of the day, she's not actually family. Not really. Blood is what matters, isn't it?" The table went silent. The German businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my composure. This wasn't new. Cassandra had been reminding me of my place for years. What was new was saying it so publicly, so deliberately cruel. That's when I heard the chair scrape against the marble floor. Ambassador Ashworth was standing, his face a mask of controlled emotion. He moved with purpose across the ballroom, weaving between tables, his eyes fixed on something, or someone. The entire room seemed to sense the shift in energy. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even Cassandra paused, watching this distinguished figure approach. He walked directly to my table, and that's when my entire world changed forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Ambassador Ashworth reached our table, but he didn't stop there. He continued past me, past the German businessman, past the junior consulate staff, and walked directly to the front of the room, where Cassandra stood frozen with her champagne glass still raised. The ballroom fell into complete silence. 200 guests watched as one of the most powerful diplomatic figures in the region approached the bride-to-be. Cassandra's face lit up with triumph. This was exactly the kind of attention she'd been craving all evening. The brutish ambassador himself was singling her out for attention. "Ambassador Ashworth," she said, her voice dripping with practiced charm. "What an absolute honor. I was hoping we'd have a chance to speak this evening." "Indeed," he replied, but his tone was ice-cold professional. "I understand you've been discussing family connections this evening. Specifically, you've been making some rather definitive statements about who and doesn't belong in your family." Cassandra's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, yes, I was just explaining to our guests about our family's charitable work. We've always believed in giving back to the community." "How noble," Ambassador Ashworth said, and something in his tone made my stomach clench. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, when you speak of charity cases and people who aren't really family, are you referring to Miss Lydia Hawthorn? The use of my name sent a ripple through the crowd. Every head in the ballroom turned toward me. I felt exposed, pinned like a butterfly in a display case. Cassandra's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw something I'd never seen before: uncertainty. Well, yes, Cassandra stammered. She's been with our family since childhood. We took her in when she had nowhere else to go. We've given her every opportunity, and we're very proud of what she's accomplished, considering what? Exactly. Ambassador Ashworth's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. Cassandra looked around the room, suddenly aware that this conversation wasn't going the way she had expected. Well, she was orphaned. Her mother died when she was young. Tragic circumstances, really. We don't really know much about her father. He was never in the picture. Could have been anyone, really. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Could have been anyone. The casual dismissal of my parentage, spoken with such certainty, such dismissive authority. I felt my chest tighten. The familiar ache of being nobody's daughter, nobody's priority, nobody's special.
But Ambassador Ashworth's expression had changed completely. The diplomatic mask had slipped, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath. Could have been anyone, he repeated slowly, letting each word settle into the silence. How fascinating that you're so certain about something you admit to knowing nothing about. Patricia Whitmore, sensing the shift in the room's energy, rose from her seat and moved toward the front. Ambassador, perhaps we could discuss this privately. No, Mrs. Whitmore, I think this conversation needs to happen exactly where Miss Whitmore chose to begin it, in front of everyone. He turned back to Cassandra, who was now visibly pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. You see, Miss Whitmore, I find myself in a rather unique position this evening. I came to your engagement party as a courtesy, diplomatic relations and all that, but what I've witnessed here tonight is something that goes far beyond diplomatic protocol. The ambassador paused, scanning the room until his eyes found mine again. When our gazes met, I saw something that made my breath catch: recognition, pain, and something that looked almost like love? You've spent this evening discussing bloodlines and family connections. You've made it very clear that you believe blood is what matters, that Miss Hawthorn, lacking known parentage, is somehow lesser, a charity case, nobody special. Cassandra nodded frantically. Yes, exactly. I mean, we love Lydia, of course, but you don't consider her real family because you don't know who her father is? Right. Well, Miss Whitmore, Ambassador Ashworth said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority, allow me to solve that mystery for you. He turned toward me, and suddenly I understood why he had been watching me all evening, why his eyes had sought mine across the crowded room, why he'd looked at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Because I was the puzzle, and he was the missing piece. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Ashworth announced, his voice filling every corner of the ballroom, I'd like you to meet my daughter. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. 200 people holding their breath simultaneously. Cassandra's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Lydia, he continued, walking toward me now, your mother was Evelyn Hawthorn. We met when I was a junior diplomat stationed in Prague. She was a translator for the embassy. We fell in love, but my career, the timing, I made choices I've regretted every day for the past 26 years. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room was spinning, or maybe I was spinning. I couldn't tell. When I learned of Evelyn's death, he continued, now standing directly in front of me, I tried to find you.
But the records were sealed, the adoption process was already underway. I've been searching for you ever since. He pulled a photograph from his jacket pocket. Old, faded, but clear enough. A young woman with dark hair and my exact eyes, standing next to a much younger version of the man in front of me. I recognized you the moment I walked in tonight. You have her eyes. And when I heard your name, Lydia Hawthorn, she always said if we had a daughter, she'd want to name her Lydia. The photograph trembled in my hands. My mother. My father. The family I'd never known I had. So, Miss Whitmore, Ambassador Ashworth said, turning back to Cassandra, who looked like she might faint, it appears your charity case is the daughter of a British ambassador. Tell me, does that change your assessment of her bloodline? Cassandra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I believe, the ambassador continued, you said blood is what matters. Well, my dear, my daughter has some of the finest blood in Britain running through her veins. Does that make her special enough for your family now? And that's when I realized that my entire life, every moment of feeling like an outsider, every time I'd been reminded that I didn't really belong, was about to change forever. Because I wasn't nobody's daughter anymore. I was the ambassador's daughter. And Cassandra had just humiliated the wrong person in front of the entire Belmont diplomatic community. The ballroom remained frozen in that impossible moment. 200 guests staring at me, at Ambassador Ashworth, at the shattered champagne glass at Cassandra's feet. The photograph trembled in my hands. My mother, my father, the family I'd never known I had. But here's the thing about living your entire life as the outsider. You learn to control your reactions. You learn to swallow shock, to process pain privately, and to never give anyone the satisfaction of seeing you break. So while every cell in my body was screaming, while my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, I did what I'd always done. I stayed calm. Ambassador Ashworth, this is quite unexpected.
The understatement of the century, but it was all I could manage. I stood slowly, the photograph still in my hands, and extended my other hand to him in a formal handshake. As if meeting my father for the first time at my adoptive sister's engagement party was just another diplomatic introduction. He looked surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or an emotional breakdown. Instead, I gave him the same professional smile I'd been perfecting for years in international relations. Thank you for clarifying the situation, I continued, glancing towards Cassandra, who was still standing motionless at the front of the room. I think it's best if we allow the celebration to continue. This is, after all, Cassandra and Jonathan's special evening. The grace of it, the absolute, unshakable grace, seemed to hit everyone at once. Here I was, having just learned the identity of my father and been publicly vindicated after years of humiliation, and I was suggesting we return focus to the people who had just humiliated me. Ambassador Ashworth's eyes flickered with something that looked like pride. Of course, he said, though perhaps we might continue this conversation privately at some point. I would like that very much, I replied, and meant it. But Cassandra wasn't ready to let the moment pass. She'd found her voice again, and with it, her desperation to regain control of her own narrative. Wait, she said, her voice higher-pitched than usual. Wait, how do we even know this is true? Anyone could claim to be someone's father. Where's the proof? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Questioning the word of a British ambassador wasn't exactly diplomatic protocol. But Cassandra was drowning, and drowning people grab onto anything. Ambassador Ashworth reached into his jacket again and withdrew a manila envelope. DNA results, he said simply. I had them run when I first suspected who you might be, Lydia. I took the liberty of testing against a hair sample from your hairbrush when I visited the house last week for the pre-party diplomatic briefing.
The revelation sent another shockwave through the room. He'd known. He'd suspected and confirmed before tonight. This entire evening had been orchestrated. The results came back yesterday. 99.97% probability of paternity. Would you like me to have them independently verified? Cassandra's face had gone from pale to gray. But she pressed on, her voice becoming shrill. But even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. She still grew up as Charity. She still needed our family to take her in. We still gave her everything she has. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for my entire life. Every slight, every reminder of my place, every time I'd been made to feel grateful for basic human dignity, it had all been building to this. I could have exploded. Could have listed every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd earned myself, every achievement they'd minimized. Could have pointed out that they'd taken in a child whose father was one of the most influential diplomats in the region, potentially opening doors they never dreamed possible, and instead treated me like an unwanted burden. Instead, I smiled. "You're absolutely right, Cassandra," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "You did take me in. You did give me a home when I needed one. And I am grateful for that." The words seemed to calm her slightly. She straightened, thinking she'd regained some ground. "However," I continued, "I think it's important to be accurate about exactly what you gave me." I paused, letting the attention settle fully on me. For once in my life, I had the room's complete focus, and I was going to use it. "You gave me a roof over my head, which I've been paying you rent for since I turned 18. You gave me food, which I started buying myself when I got my first job at 15. You gave me clothing, most of which was hand-me-downs from Cassandra or donations from church members." Each fact landed with surgical precision. I kept my tone conversational, matter-of-fact, as if I were reading from a diplomatic briefing. "You gave me access to education, though when Cassandra went to Hillcrest Academy at $30,000 per year, I attended Belmont Public. You gave me transportation, a bicycle, while Cassandra received a BMW for her 16th birthday. The German businessman at my table was taking notes, I noticed peripherally. Probably the most interesting dinner conversation he'd had in years. You gave me emotional support, though most of our conversations centered around how grateful I should be and how I should never forget what they'd done for me. You gave me family connections, though I was regularly reminded that I wasn't real family." Cassandra was opening and closing her mouth like a fish, but no words were coming out. "So yes, you gave me things. But what I've accomplished, my education, my career, my languages, my professional reputation, those things I gave myself with the help of scholarships, part-time jobs, and 16-hour study days." The silence was absolute now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving.
"And now," I said, glancing at Ambassador Ashworth, "I discover that the bloodline you've spent tonight dismissing happens to include British nobility, diplomatic immunity, and connections to governments across 3 continents." I turned back to Cassandra with that same calm smile. "I suppose the question now is, what exactly have you given someone who didn't actually need your charity in the first place?" Ambassador Ashworth stepped forward slightly. "If I may," he said, and his voice now carried the full weight of his diplomatic authority. "I've been watching this family dynamic for the past week during the party planning process. I've seen how my daughter is treated, how she's spoken to, how she's positioned within your family structure." He paused, scanning the room. "I've also seen her work. Her diplomatic skills, her cultural sensitivity, her ability to navigate complex international relationships. She's facilitated more successful trade agreements in the past 2 years than officers twice her age with formal diplomatic training." Another pause. "So, while I'm grateful that you provided her with shelter during her childhood,
I think it's important to note that you've had the privilege of raising one of the most naturally gifted diplomats I've encountered in my 30-year career. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. For the first time in my life, someone was publicly recognizing my worth, not as a charity case or a burden, but as someone valuable in my own right. Perhaps, he continued, the question isn't what you've given her, but what she's given you. The respectability of raising an ambassador's daughter, the social connections through her professional network, the reflected glory of her achievements. He looked directly at Patricia Whitmore, who had been conspicuously silent throughout this entire exchange. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, how many of tonight's diplomatic guests did Lydia arrange for you to meet? The answer was 12, and everyone knew it. And how many international business deals has she facilitated for your husband's company over the past 3 years? The answer was 6, worth approximately $2 million in revenue. So perhaps, Ambassador Ashworth concluded, it's time to reconsider who exactly has been the charity case in this arrangement. And that's when I realized that my calm, controlled reaction hadn't been weakness at all. It had been power. Because now, everyone in that ballroom, including Cassandra, could see exactly what they'd been blind to for 18 years. I wasn't the lucky charity case who'd been saved by their generosity. I was the asset they'd never recognized, the connection they'd never valued, and the daughter they'd never deserved. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of whispered conversations and careful diplomatic maneuvering. Cassandra managed to salvage what remained of her engagement party, though the energy had shifted completely. Instead of celebrating her union with Jonathan, guests were gravitating toward me, suddenly eager to make the acquaintance of Ambassador Ashworth's daughter. But I wasn't ready for any of that yet. The revelation was too fresh, too overwhelming. After an hour of polite small talk and thinly veiled questions about my new circumstances, I excused myself to the hotel's business center, claiming I needed to check on some urgent trade correspondence. What I really needed was space to think. I sat in the quiet business center, staring at my reflection in the dark computer screen, trying to process everything that had happened. My father. I had a father. Not just any father, but one of the most influential diplomatic figures in the region, the man I'd been reading about in international relations journals, whose policies I'd studied in graduate school, whose career I'd followed with professional admiration. He was my father. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Nathaniel. I hope it's all right that I got your number from the diplomatic directory. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow? There's so much I need to tell you, so much I need to explain." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "I'd like that very much." His response was immediate. "Excellent. The Meridian Hotel lobby, 10 a.m. And, Lydia, I'm so proud of how you handled yourself tonight. Your mother would be proud too." That's when the tears finally came. Not the dramatic breakdown anyone might have expected at the party, but quiet, private tears for the mother I barely remembered and the father I'd never known I had. But even through the emotion, my mind was working. Years of diplomatic training had taught me to think strategically, to see beyond the immediate situation to the larger implications. And as I sat there, wiping away tears and trying to process the personal earthquake of the evening, I began to realize something that changed everything. I wasn't just Lydia Hawthorn anymore, the grateful charity case trying to prove her worth. I was Lydia Ashworth, daughter of a British ambassador, with all the diplomatic immunity, social connections, and international influence that title carried.
More importantly, I was beginning to understand just how much power the Whitmore family had been wielding over me, and how dramatically that power dynamic had just shifted. I pulled out my laptop and began doing what I did best: research. First, I looked up the specifics of diplomatic immunity and family members. As the acknowledged daughter of a sitting ambassador, I was entitled to certain protections and privileges I'd never even known existed. Not just social status, but actual legal protections. Next, I examined the Whitmore family's business connections. Richard Whitmore's construction company had been struggling for years until 3 years ago, when suddenly they started landing lucrative contracts with international firms setting up offices in Belmont. Foreign companies needed local contractors who understood international building standards and could navigate complex regulatory requirements. Guess who had been facilitating those connections? Me. Every single one of them. I'd been so focused on proving myself worthy of their charity that I'd never stopped to calculate exactly how much my professional network was worth to them. But now, sitting in that quiet business center with my laptop and 3 years of email correspondence, I could see it clearly. The Meridian Hotel's renovation contract that kept Richard's company afloat during the 2019 recession, I'd introduced him to the Austrian Development Group. The luxury residential complex being built for the new European consulate staff, I'd arranged that meeting too. The commercial district project that had been Richard's biggest success to date, the German investment firm had specifically requested him based on my recommendation. In 3 years, I'd been responsible for bringing approximately $4.2 million in business to the Whitmore Construction Company. They'd never once acknowledged this contribution, instead treating each success as proof of Richard's business acumen and the family's growing reputation. But there was more. Patricia's social standing in Belmont society had skyrocketed over the past 2 years, coinciding exactly with her newfound ability to host diplomatic wives for charity luncheons and cultural events. Invitations that came through my professional connections. Access to exclusive diplomatic social circles that existed because of my position at the International Trade Council. Even Cassandra's engagement to Jonathan Aldridge made more sense now. The Aldridge family shipping business had been looking to expand their European routes. Jonathan had mentioned at family dinners how impressed his father was with the Whitmore family's international connections and their ability to facilitate relationships with the right people. Again, me. All me. But the most interesting discovery came when I searched through the diplomatic correspondence database I had access to through work. There it was, buried in routine communication logs. Ambassador Ashworth had been requesting meetings with Richard Whitmore for the past 6 months, ostensibly to discuss British investment in local infrastructure projects. Richard had been declining these meetings, claiming his schedule was too busy to accommodate preliminary discussions. He'd asked Patricia to handle the correspondence, and Patricia had been delegating it to me. I'd been the one politely declining my own father's attempts to make contact with the family that had raised me. I sat back in my chair, the full scope of the situation finally becoming clear. The Whitmores hadn't just taken in a charity case 18 years ago. They'd unknowingly acquired one of the most valuable social and business assets they could have imagined. The daughter of a British ambassador, raised in their household, loyal to their family, using her inherited diplomatic instincts to build their business and social standing. And they treated me like I should be grateful for the privilege. But now I knew something they didn't. I wasn't just their secret weapon anymore. I was a diplomatic asset with my own independent power base. I had immunity they couldn't touch, connections they couldn't control, and a father whose influence extended far beyond anything they'd ever imagined. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that every success they'd achieved in the past 3 years, every business deal, every social connection, every step up the ladder of Belmont society, had been built on my work and my relationships, which meant I could take it all away just as easily as I'd given it to them. I opened a new document on my laptop and began making a list. Every introduction I'd made, every connection I'd facilitated, every relationship I'd built on behalf of the Whitmore family. The list was longer than I'd expected and more valuable than I'd ever realized. Then I started a second list.
Every slight, every reminder of my place, every time I've been made to feel like I should be grateful for basic human dignity, every family dinner where my achievements were minimized, every holiday where I was reminded I was lucky to be included, every birthday where my gifts were presented as charity rather than celebration. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. The business center was empty except for security guards making their rounds, but I felt more awake than I had in years, because I finally understood what I'd been missing all these years. The Whitmores thought they held all the power in our relationship because they'd given me a home when I was 8 years old. They thought I owed them everything because they'd taken me in.
But what they'd never realized was that I'd been repaying that debt with interest for years. And now that I knew my true value, both personally and professionally, I could finally see our relationship for what it really was. It wasn't charity. It had never been charity. It was an investment that had been paying dividends they'd never acknowledged, built on labor they'd never compensated, sustained by loyalty they'd never deserved. And tomorrow, when I had coffee with my father, I was going to begin the process of collecting what was actually mine. Starting with the one thing that had always been most important to me: respect. Because Lydia Hawthorn might have been grateful for charity, but Lydia Ashworth didn't owe anyone anything. I barely slept that night. By 6 a.m., I was already dressed and reviewing the notes I'd compiled in the business center. 3 legal pads filled with connections, financial contributions, and a growing understanding of just how dramatically my life was about to change. The coffee meeting with Ambassador Ashworth, with my father, was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I had something important to do first. I drove to my office at the International Trade Council, using my weekend access card to enter the building. The place was empty except for security, which was perfect. I needed privacy for what I was about to do. In my office, I pulled out the files I'd been meticulously maintaining for 3 years. Every introduction, every facilitated meeting, every successful business connection I'd arranged. What I'd initially kept as professional documentation was about to become something much more valuable. I started with the Whitmore construction contracts. Each file contained not just the basic agreement details, but my personal correspondence with the international firms, my recommendations, my cultural briefings that had made these deals possible. Without my interventions, these companies would never have chosen a small Belmont construction firm over established international contractors. Then I opened my diplomatic correspondence files. Every email, every meeting request, every cultural exchange program I'd coordinated. The network I'd built wasn't just impressive, it was irreplaceable. These relationships had taken years to develop, built on trust, cultural understanding, and proven results. Most importantly, these relationships were personal. They were with me, not with the Whitmores. When the German investment group requested the young woman who understands European business protocol, they meant me. When the Austrian development team insisted on working with someone who speaks fluent German and understands our cultural expectations, they meant me. The Whitmores had been taking credit for my work for so long that they'd forgotten these connections weren't theirs to claim. I picked up my phone and began making a series of very careful, very strategic phone calls. First call was to Heinrich Müller, the German businessman I'd been seated with the night before. He answered immediately despite the early hour. "Lydia, what an extraordinary evening! I had no idea I was dining with Ambassador Ashworth's daughter. My sincere congratulations on such a wonderful reunion." "Thank you, Heinrich. Actually, that's why I'm calling. Yesterday's revelations have created some complications with my current living situation. I may need to make some professional adjustments." Of course. Family dynamics can be complex. How can I assist? Well, I wanted to give you advance notice that I may be transitioning away from facilitating business relationships for the Whitmore Construction Company. I thought you should hear this directly from me, given our professional relationship. There was a pause. I see. Will this affect the Vienna project we discussed last month?
That depends entirely on whether Richard Whitmore wants to continue working with me personally or if he prefers to handle international relations through other channels. Heinrich's laugh was knowing. Lydia, my dear, Richard Whitmore couldn't navigate Austrian building codes if his life depended on it. We work with his company because we work with you. If you're no longer facilitating that relationship, then you might want to consider other options? Precisely. Please keep me informed of your decisions. And Lydia, my firm has been discussing the possibility of hiring a dedicated cultural liaison for our North American operations. Should your circumstances change, we'd very much like to discuss opportunities with you. Perfect. One down. Second call was to Marie-Claire Dubois, the French cultural attaché who'd helped me arrange several high-profile art exhibitions that had elevated Patricia's social standing considerably. Marie-Claire, it's Lydia Ashworth. Using my new name felt strange, but powerful. Ashworth. But I thought, oh my goodness, Ambassador Ashworth is your father? Lydia, this is wonderful news. Thank you. Listen, I'm calling because there may be some changes in my working relationship with the Whitmore family's cultural initiatives. I wanted to make sure you heard this directly from me. Changes? What kind of changes? I may no longer be coordinating their cultural programs. I thought you should know, since I know how much planning goes into your exhibition schedules. Lydia, you understand that without your coordination, these programs... Well, Patricia Whitmore is lovely, but she has no understanding of French cultural protocols. The exhibition we have planned for next month will probably need to be postponed unless alternative arrangements can be made, or unless you're available to coordinate independently. That's possible. Let me get back to you. The third call was the most important. James Morrison, head of the European consortium that had been considering a major infrastructure investment in Belmont. A project worth approximately $8 million that Richard Whitmore had been positioning his company to bid on. James, it's Lydia. I hope I'm not calling too early? Lydia, never too early for you. How did the engagement party go last night? I was sorry to miss it. It was illuminating. James, I need to discuss something important with you. There may be some changes in how I'm able to facilitate local business relationships. What kind of changes? I may no longer be working directly with Whitmore Construction on international projects. Long pause. Lydia, you understand that our interest in Belmont is almost entirely based on your cultural expertise and relationship management. I understand that. Without your involvement, I'm not sure we'd be comfortable moving forward with local contractors. The cultural barriers are too significant, and frankly, we don't trust anyone else to navigate the complexities. What if I were available to consult independently? Then we'd very much like to discuss exclusive arrangement terms with you personally. By 9 a.m., I'd made 12 phone calls. The pattern was consistent. Every significant business relationship, every cultural connection, every international opportunity the Whitmores had benefited from in the past 3 years was directly tied to me personally. More importantly, every single contact had made it clear that their loyalty was to me, not to the Whitmore family name. I printed out summaries of each conversation and placed them in a folder marked Transition Planning. Then I opened my laptop and began drafting a very careful, very professional email. The subject line read, Notice of Professional Transition, effective immediately. I addressed it to Richard Whitmore, Patricia Whitmore, and Cassandra Whitmore Aldridge. Dear family, given yesterday's revelations about my parentage and the subsequent clarification of my professional standing in the international community, I feel it's important to formalize some changes in our working relationship. Effective immediately, I will be transitioning away from facilitating business and cultural relationships on behalf of the Whitmore Enterprises. This decision comes after careful consideration of my new circumstances and responsibilities as Ambassador Ashworth's daughter. I want to be clear that this transition will affect several ongoing projects and relationships. The European Consortium Infrastructure Project, the French Cultural Exchange Program, the German Investment Group contracts, the Austrian Development Team Partnership, various diplomatic social connections.
I have taken the liberty of informing our international partners of this transition so they can make alternative arrangements if needed. I want to thank you for the opportunities you've provided me to develop these professional relationships. I hope you understand that my new circumstances require me to prioritize diplomatic protocol and family loyalties accordingly. Please let me know how you'd like to handle the transition of any ongoing projects. With respect and gratitude for our years together, Lydia Ashworth, daughter of Ambassador Nathaniel Ashworth. I saved the email as a draft. I wouldn't send it yet. That would happen after my conversation with my father. But having it ready felt like putting on armor. Because what I'd realized during those phone calls was something the Whitmores had never understood. They hadn't been doing me a favor by letting me work for their benefit. I'd been doing them a favor by choosing to share my talents with their family. But that choice had always been mine to make. And now, it was mine to unmake. I locked the files in my office safe, gathered my notes, and headed to the Meridian Hotel. It was time to meet my father and begin the next phase of my life. The phase where I stopped being grateful for scraps and started demanding the respect I'd always deserved. Because Lydia Ashworth didn't just have diplomatic immunity, she had diplomatic leverage. And she was about to use it. The Meridian Hotel lobby at 10 a.m. on a Sunday morning was nearly empty, just a few business travelers checking out and the soft murmur of the hotel staff preparing for the day. I spotted Ambassador Ashworth, my father, immediately. He was sitting in a leather armchair near the windows, reading the Financial Times, looking every inch like a distinguished diplomat. When he saw me approaching, he stood with a smile that transformed his entire face. For a moment, I could see exactly what my mother must have fallen in love with all those years ago. "Lydia," he said, and the way he said my name made my chest tight with emotion I wasn't prepared for. "Ambassador," I replied, then hesitated. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what to call you." "Nathaniel would be perfect, or—" He paused, looking almost shy. "Dad, if you're comfortable with that, though I understand if you need some time." I wasn't ready for Dad yet, but I smiled and said, "Nathaniel, it is, for now." We settled into armchairs with our coffee, and for a few minutes, we simply looked at each other. 26 years of separation isn't easily bridged, even with DNA evidence and emotional revelations. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally, "about why I wasn't there, about why I didn't find you sooner."
So he told me about Prague, about my mother Evelyn, about a love affair that had to remain secret because of diplomatic protocols and security concerns, about how they'd planned to marry when his posting ended, but how she died in a car accident before he could return, about how the adoption records were sealed, how the Whitmore family had been specifically chosen because of their discretion and standing in the community. "I've been searching for you since I was appointed to this region," he said. "But it wasn't until I saw you at that diplomatic briefing last month that I began to suspect. You have her mannerisms, her intelligence, her way of making everyone in the room feel heard and valued." That's when he told me about the hair sample, about the DNA test, about how he'd spent the past week watching me from a distance, confirming what his heart had already known. "I wanted to tell you privately," he said. "But when I heard what that young woman said about you last night, I couldn't stand by and watch my daughter be humiliated by people who owe you everything." "About that," I said, pulling out my phone, "I think there's something you should know about exactly how much they owe me." I showed him my notes from the morning's phone calls, the financial calculations, the business relationships. His eyebrows rose higher with each revelation. $4.2 million in business contracts? He asked. That's just the direct construction deals. If you factor in the social connections, the cultural programs, the ongoing diplomatic relationships, it's probably closer to $8 million in total value. He sat back in his chair, processing. "And they've been treating you like a charity case for 18 years. That's when my phone started buzzing. Text after text, all from the Whitmore family. I glanced at the screen and felt a familiar mix of satisfaction and wariness. From Richard. "Lydia, we need to talk. Heinrich Mueller just called about the Vienna project. There seems to be some confusion about your involvement." "There's no miscommunication, Richard.
I informed Heinrich that I may be transitioning away from facilitating business relationships for Whitmore Construction. Silence. Then what the hell does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. Given my new circumstances as Ambassador Ashworth's daughter, I need to reassess my professional priorities. Your new circumstances? Lydia, you're still part of this family. You still live in our house. You still have obligations. Actually, Richard, I think you'll find my obligations have changed considerably, as has my living situation. Another silence. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'll be moving out of the Whitmore house today. I'll be staying at the embassy guest quarters while I sort out my new arrangements. This wasn't entirely true. I hadn't discussed living arrangements with Nathaniel yet, but his immediate nod told me it wouldn't be a problem. You can't just leave. Richard's voice was rising. The European Consortium meeting is next week. The French Cultural Program launches next month. You have responsibilities. I have no legal obligations to continue working for your family, Richard. My contributions over the past 3 years have been voluntary acts of gratitude, not contractual requirements. But what about loyalty? What about family? The irony was staggering. Family loyalty is interesting topic, Richard. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you acknowledged my contributions to your business success? Well, we've always been grateful. When was the last time you included me in business decisions that were built on my relationships? Lydia, you're being dramatic. When was the last time you treated me like an equal member of this family instead of a charity case who should be grateful for basic human dignity? The silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Richard, I said finally. I'm here. His voice was different now, smaller. Look, maybe we haven't always... Maybe we could have done better, but you can't just destroy everything we've built together. I'm not destroying anything, Richard. I'm simply withdrawing my voluntary support. If your business relationships can't survive without my personal facilitation, then perhaps they weren't as strong as you believed. Nathaniel was watching me with an expression of pure pride, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly supported. The consortium meeting, Richard started,
will proceed as scheduled. James Morrison is very interested in continuing our professional relationship, just not through Whitmore Construction. The sharp intake of breath told me he understood exactly what that meant. You're blackmailing us. I'm establishing boundaries, Richard. There's a difference. What do you want? And there it was. The question I'd been waiting for. The moment when they stopped pretending this was about family loyalty and started acknowledging what it had always really been about, my value to their success. I want recognition, Richard. I want acknowledgement of my contributions. I want to be treated as the professional asset I've always been instead of the charity case you've made me feel like. Fine. Fine, we can discuss that, but you need to call Heinrich back. You need to fix this. I will consider it, I said, after we have a family meeting to discuss the terms of our new arrangement. What terms? I looked at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. Equal partnership in any business deals I facilitate, credit for my contributions, respect for my professional expertise, and most importantly, an end to the narrative that I'm someone who should be grateful for charity. You want partnership? I want what I've earned, Richard, what I should have been offered years ago. Another long silence. We need to discuss this as a family. Good. I'll be available this afternoon. And, Richard, I'll be bringing Ambassador Ashworth to the meeting. I think it's time he met the family that raised his daughter. I hung up and looked at Nathaniel, whose smile was absolutely radiant. That, he said, was masterfully done. I learned from the best.
Apparently, I inherited more than just your eyes. My phone was buzzing again with messages from Patricia and Cassandra, but I ignored them. For the first time in my adult life, I had leverage, and I intended to use it wisely. Because the Whitmores were about to learn something they should have understood 18 years ago. Respect isn't given out of charity. It's earned through recognition of value. And they were about to pay the full price for everything they'd taken for granted. The family meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. at the Whitmore house, a deliberate choice on my part. I wanted them on their own territory when they realized just how completely that territory depended on me. Nathaniel and I spent the afternoon at the embassy, where he gave me a tour of the facilities and introduced me to his staff as his daughter. The pride in his voice each time he said it was something I'd never experienced before, and I found myself standing a little taller, speaking with more confidence. "Before we go to this meeting," he said, as we sat in his office reviewing my documentation, "I want you to understand something important. You don't need their approval anymore. You don't need their acceptance. You have options now that you've never had before." "What kind of options?" "Well, for starters, there's a position opening in our cultural liaison department. Senior level, competitive salary, full diplomatic benefits. It's yours if you want it." The offer was tempting, more than tempting, but I shook my head. "I appreciate that, truly, but I want to see if they can learn to value what they've always had. If they can't," I shrugged, "then we'll know where we stand." At 3:45, we pulled into the Whitmore driveway in Nathaniel's diplomatic vehicle, a black sedan with official British plates and small diplomatic flags. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was no longer arriving as the charity case daughter. I was arriving as the ambassador's child, backed by the full weight of British diplomatic authority. Patricia answered the door, and I watched her expression shift from nervous smile to barely concealed shock when she saw Nathaniel beside me. "Ambassador Ashworth," she said, her voice slightly strained, "an honor to have you in our home." "The honor is mine, Mrs. Whitmore. Thank you for raising my daughter with such care." The polite diplomacy of it was perfect. Nathaniel was acknowledging their role while simultaneously claiming his own, and Patricia looked like she couldn't decide whether to be flattered or terrified. We were led to the formal living room where Richard and Cassandra were waiting. Jonathan was there too, looking uncomfortable and out of place. The family was dressed as if for church, their Sunday best for meeting an ambassador. "Please sit," Richard said, gesturing to the couch, but I remained standing, and Nathaniel followed my lead. "Actually," I said, "I prefer to stand for this conversation. It won't take long." Richard's face was flushed, his usual confidence replaced with barely controlled desperation. "Lydia, we need to talk about this morning. The phone calls, the threats to our business relationships." "I made no threats, Richard. I simply informed our international partners of potential changes in my availability." "Our partners?" Richard's voice cracked slightly on the words. "Excuse me? You said our partners. These are your relationships, Lydia. We know that. We've always known that." It was the first honest thing he'd said in years, and the admission hung in the air like a confession. "Then why," I asked quietly, "have you spent 3 years taking credit for my work?" "We never took credit."
Last month's Chamber of Commerce dinner, your speech about Whitmore Construction's international vision and cultural expertise. My work, your credit. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. The Belmont Business Journal profile that called you Belmont's International Connector, based entirely on relationships I built and maintained. Lydia? The Meridian Hotel contract presentation where you told the Austrian Development Group that Whitmore Construction had unique insights into European business culture, insights you learned from sitting in my debriefings. Each example landed like a physical blow. Richard was shrinking into his chair, and I could see him finally understanding the scope of what he'd taken for granted. But Cassandra wasn't ready to surrender. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, standing up to face me. "You're acting like we forced you to help us. Everything you did was voluntary. We never asked you to make those connections." I turned to look at her, really look at her, for the first time since the engagement party. "You're right, Cassandra. It was voluntary. Just like my decision to stop is voluntary. You can't just destroy our family's business because your feelings got hurt." "Hurt feelings?" I repeated. "Is that what you think this is about?" "Isn't it? You found out you're some ambassador's daughter, and now you think you're too good for us?" The words were perfectly, predictably Cassandra, that I almost laughed. But Nathaniel stepped forward before I could respond. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying the full authority of his diplomatic position, "I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what's happening here. Ambassador, with respect, this is a family matter." "Indeed, it is. It's a matter concerning my family, my daughter, who has apparently been treated as hired help rather than family member for the past 18 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Nathaniel's diplomatic composure was absolute, but there was steel underneath it. Now, Lydia has graciously offered to continue facilitating these business relationships under new terms that acknowledge her actual value rather than treating her contributions as charity work. Patricia finally found her voice. "Ambassador, surely you understand that family relationships are complex. Lydia has always been important to us. Important enough to publicly humiliate at her sister's engagement party?" The question silenced the room. "Important enough to credit for the business success she's generated." Silence. "Important enough to include in the financial benefits of her professional expertise?" More silence. "I see," Nathaniel said. "Then perhaps we should discuss what happens when that expertise is no longer available to you." That's when Richard finally broke. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice raw with desperation. "Money, a percentage of the business, your name on the contracts. Just tell us what you want." I looked around the room, at Patricia's pale face, at Cassandra's defiant but shaken expression, at Richard's barely controlled panic. These people who had shaped my entire understanding of my own worth, who had taught me to be grateful for scraps, who had made me believe I was lucky to be tolerated. "I want you to choose," I said quietly. "Choose what?" "You can acknowledge my contributions, offer me equal partnership in the business I've helped build, and treat me with the respect I've earned. Or you can continue to see me as a charity case who should be grateful for your generosity. And if we choose wrong..." I pulled out my phone and opened my email drafts. Then I sent this message to every international contact in my professional network. I showed them the email I drafted that morning, a formal notice of professional transition that would effectively end the Whitmore family's international business relationships. "Lydia," Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly, "you're destroying everything we've worked for." "No, Mom," I said, using the title deliberately. "I'm finally recognizing what I've worked for, what I've built, what I've contributed. The question is whether you're capable of doing the same." Richard stood up, his face red with anger and fear. "This is blackmail, pure and simple blackmail." "No, Richard," Nathaniel interjected smoothly. "This is diplomacy. Lydia is offering you a negotiated settlement that acknowledges reality. You can accept those terms, or you can face the consequences of rejecting them." "What consequences?" I held up my phone again. "One email, Richard. One email, and every international business relationship you've built in the past 3 years disappears. The Vienna Project, the French Cultural Exchange, the European Consortium Investment, the Aldridge shipping contracts, all gone." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a family finally understanding the true balance of power in their relationships. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. 9 a.m., and I'll be in my new office at the embassy, and I'll be expecting your answer." "Your new office?"
Cassandra asked weakly. Did I forget to mention, I'll be working as senior cultural liaison for the British Embassy. Full diplomatic status, competitive salary, comprehensive benefits. Amazing what opportunities open up when people recognize your actual worth. I paused at the door and looked back at them one final time.
18 years ago, you took in a child who needed a home. That child grew up to become one of the most valuable international business assets in Belmont. The question you need to answer is this: do you want to be the family that nurtured that asset or the family that threw it away? Nathaniel and I walked out together, leaving them sitting in stunned silence. As we got into the diplomatic car, he turned to me with an expression of absolute pride. That, he said, was masterful. Your mother would be so proud. I looked back at the house where I'd lived for 18 years, knowing I would never again enter it as the grateful charity case. When I returned, if I returned, it would be as an equal. Or not at all. I slept better that night than I had in years. The embassy guest quarters were quiet, elegant, and most importantly, free from the constant undercurrent of obligation and gratitude that had permeated every moment in the Whitmore house. By 7 a.m., my phone was already buzzing. The first text came from Patricia. Lydia, please come home. We need to talk as a family, without the ambassador. Some things should stay private. Then Richard. This has gone too far. You're hurting innocent people. Think about what this means for Jonathan and Cassandra's future. Then Cassandra herself. I can't believe you're doing this to us after everything we've given you. Mom is crying. Is this really what you want? I was reading through the messages over coffee when Nathaniel knocked on my door. Rough morning already? He asked, noticing my phone. They're pulling out all the stops. Guilt, family loyalty, emotional manipulation, the works. Classic negotiation tactics when people realize they have no actual leverage, he said with a wry smile. What's your read on their strategy? They're hoping I'll fold if they make it emotional enough, make me feel guilty for hurting the family. As if on cue, my phone rang, Patricia's name on the screen. Answer it, Nathaniel suggested. Let's see what they're offering. I put it on speaker. Good morning, Patricia. I'm not a stranger. I'm the ambassador's daughter staying in diplomatic quarters while we negotiate my professional relationship with your family. Professional relationship, honey, your family. You'll always be family. This business talk is just, it's not us. It's not how we do things. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. How do we do things, Patricia? With love, with understanding, with forgiveness. Remember when you were 8 years old and so scared? We opened our hearts to you. We made you part of our family when you had no one else. There it was, the guilt foundation they'd built their entire relationship with me on, the 8-year-old girl who needed their charity. I remember, I said calmly. I also remember the 18 years that followed. Would you like to detail those memories as well? Silence. Patricia, let me ask you something. In all those 18 years, how many times did you introduce me as your daughter versus introducing me as the girl we took in? That's not fair. How many times did you credit my achievements to the opportunities you provided versus recognizing my own effort and talent? Lydia, you're twisting things. How many times did you include me in family decisions that directly affected my work and relationships? We always valued your input. When? When did you ask my opinion about using my relationships to secure Jonathan's family's business interests? When did you consult me about leveraging my cultural connections for your social climbing? The questions landed like hammer blows. Nathaniel is watching with the focused attention of someone taking notes for future diplomatic reference. That's not, we never thought of it that way. No, you didn't think of it at all. You thought of me as a convenient resource that came with built-in loyalty and guilt-based compliance. Patricia's voice cracked. How can you say such cruel things after everything we've done for you? What you've done for me, Patricia, is teach me to accept less than I deserve in exchange for basic human kindness. That's not love. That's conditioning. The line went quiet except for Patricia's barely audible crying. Mom's devastated, came Cassandra's voice. She'd taken the phone. Are you happy now? You've made our mother cry.
Your mother is crying because she's realizing that her business success and social standing have been built on the expertise of someone she's never properly valued. That's not my fault. That's consequence. Consequence? For what? For giving you a home? For loving you? For taking credit for my work? For treating me like hired help while calling it family? For making me believe I should be grateful for the privilege of building your success? You're being ridiculous. We never made you do anything. You're right. You never made me. You just created an environment where refusing would make me ungrateful, selfish, and disloyal. Very different from force, but remarkably effective.
Cassandra's voice turned sharp. Fine. You want to burn everything down? Go ahead. But don't pretend you're the victim here. You're destroying people who love you because you're angry about some perceived slight. Perceived slight, I repeated. Cassandra, at your engagement party, you called me nobody special in front of 200 people. You said I wasn't real family. You dismissed my parentage as irrelevant. Which part of that was perception? I was nervous. It was a big night. I said things wrong. You said exactly what you believed. The only thing that changed was discovering my father's identity. Suddenly, I'm worth treating with respect? That's not... Look, maybe I could have phrased things better. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Cassandra, you spent 5 minutes explaining to a room full of diplomats and business leaders why I was a charity case who should be grateful for your family's generosity. That wasn't poor phrasing. That was a calculated humiliation. It wasn't calculated. I was just trying to explain what? Explain that I don't belong? Explain that I'm not real family? Mission accomplished. The phone went quiet again. Then Richard's voice came on. Lydia, enough. This has gone too far. You've made your point. We understand you're upset. But this isn't about family anymore. This is about business, about livelihoods, about people's futures. You're right, Richard. It is about business. It's about the business I've built for you that you've never acknowledged. It's about the livelihoods I've secured for you that you've never credited. It's about the future I've helped create for you that you've never included me in. So what do you want? Partnership? Profit sharing? Just name your price. And there it was. The moment when they stopped pretending this was about family and started treating it like the business transaction it had always been. My price, Richard, is respect, recognition, equal treatment, the same consideration you'd give any professional asset of my caliber. Fine, we can do that. Come home and we'll work out the details. The details get worked out first. Then I come home. If I come home. What details? I looked at Nathaniel and he nodded encouragingly. Formal partnership agreement, legal documentation of my contributions, profit sharing on all deals I facilitate, equal decision-making authority on international business matters, and a public correction of the narrative about my role in the family's success. Public correction? A statement acknowledging that Whitmore Construction's international success has been built on my professional relationships and cultural expertise, with credit where credit is due. Silence. And if we refuse? I opened my email and hovered my finger over the send button. Then, at 9 a.m., I sent the transition notice to every international contact in my network. Heinrich Müller, Marie-Claire Dubois, James Morrison, the European Consortium, the German Investment Group, the Austrian Development Team, and 47 other business and cultural connections. Lydia,
Patricia's voice was back, tearful and desperate. "Please don't do this to us. We're family. Family forgives. Family works things out. Don't let pride destroy what we've built together." "Patricia, family also respects each other. Family gives credit where credit is due. Family doesn't humiliate each other in public. Family doesn't take advantage of loyalty and twist it into obligation. We can learn. We can do better." "Maybe you can. We'll find out at 9 a.m. I hung up and looked at Nathaniel. "How did I do?" He said with pride, "You gave them every opportunity to choose the honorable path while maintaining your own position of strength." My phone was buzzing again with messages, but I ignored them. "The hardest part," I said, "is that I still love them. Even after everything, part of me wants to just forgive and forget." "That's what makes you strong. Not the absence of love, but the presence of self-respect alongside it. And if they choose wrong, then you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you gave them every chance to choose right." I looked at my phone. 8:47 a.m. 13 minutes to find out whether the Whitmore family could learn to value what they had always taken for granted, or whether they'd rather lose it entirely rather than admit they'd been wrong. At an 8:59 a.m., my finger was hovering over the send button when my phone rang. It was Richard. "Wait," he said without preamble. "Don't send anything yet. We accept your terms." "Which terms specifically, Richard?" "All of them. Partnership, profit sharing, recognition, everything. Just please don't destroy us." The desperation in his voice was complete, but I learned not to trust words without action. "I'll need that in writing, legal documentation, by noon today." "Done. We'll have our lawyer draft everything this morning." "And the public acknowledgement?" A pause. "What exactly do you want us to say?"
The truth, Richard. A statement acknowledging that Whitmore Construction's international success has been built on my professional relationships and expertise. Published in the Belmont Business Journal and sent to all your business contacts.
That's going to be humiliating.
As humiliating as being called nobody special at a party full of diplomats?
Fine. We'll do it.
I should have felt victorious. This was everything I demanded. Total capitulation, recognition, partnership, respect. But something felt wrong. "Richard," I said slowly, "you're agreeing to this very quickly. Why?"
Because we don't have a choice. You've got us backed into a corner and you know it.
That's not the same as understanding why we're here.
What do you mean?
Do you actually believe I deserve these things, or are you just afraid of the consequences of refusing? The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Richard?"
Look, Lydia, you've proven your point. You've shown us how much we depend on you. We get it. You win.
"I win?" I repeated. "Richard, this was never about winning. This was about being valued for my contributions instead of being treated like a charity case."
Right. And now we'll value you. Problem solved.
But it wasn't solved. I could hear it in his voice, the resentment, the anger, the sense that I'd forced them into submission rather than help them understand. They weren't agreeing because they recognized my worth. They were agreeing because I demonstrated my power. "Richard, let me ask you something. If I hadn't turned out to be Ambassador Ashworth's daughter, would we be having this conversation?"
That's not relevant.
It's completely relevant. Would you be offering me partnership if I were still just Lydia Hawthorn, the charity case with useful international connections?
The silence stretched long enough that I had my answer. "I see," I said quietly. "Lydia, does it matter? The result is the same. You get what you want." "The result isn't the same, Richard. Because what I wanted was to be valued for who I am, not feared for who my father is." Nathaniel was watching me with concern now, recognizing something in my tone. "Look, maybe we didn't appreciate you enough before. Maybe we took things for granted. But we're fixing that now. Isn't that what you wanted?" "You're not fixing anything, Richard. You're managing a crisis. There's a difference." "What difference?" "You demanded recognition. We're giving it to you. You wanted partnership. We're offering it. What more do you want?" And that's when I realized that the conversation I'd been having with them for the past 24 hours wasn't the conversation they'd been having with me. They thought this was about power, about leverage, about getting what I wanted through force. They had completely missed the point. "Richard, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "Okay." "Do you believe that I, as a person, regardless of my parentage or my connections, deserve to be treated as an equal member of this family?"
The pause was too long, far too long. "Of course," he said finally, but the hesitation had already given me my answer. "Thank you for your honesty. So we have a deal?" I looked at Nathaniel, who nodded slightly. We both understood what needed to happen next. "No, Richard, we don't." "What? But you said—" "I said I wanted recognition and respect. What you're offering is fear-based compliance. That's not the same thing." "Lydia, please. I'm sending the email now." And I did. I pressed send and watched as the transition notice went out to every international contact in my professional network. 49 messages, each one professionally worded, explaining that I was no longer facilitating business relationships on behalf of Whitmore Construction and would be transitioning to independent consulting through the British Embassy. "You just destroyed us." Richard's voice was hollow with shock. "No, Richard. I just stopped pretending that we had a relationship built on mutual respect when it was actually built on your dependence and my misguided loyalty." I hung up and immediately opened my laptop. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it completely. No half measures, no room for misinterpretation. I began typing a comprehensive LinkedIn post, documenting everything. Not an emotional rant, but a professional, detailed account of the past 3 years. The connections I'd facilitated, the cultural expertise I'd provided, the business relationships I'd built and maintained. But more importantly, I wrote about the pattern of unacknowledged contributions, the credit taken by others, the systematic treatment as a grateful recipient rather than a valued contributor.
I attached documentation, screenshots of emails showing my initial connections with each major client, photos from cultural events I'd organized, testimonials from international partners specifically praising my personal expertise. The post was 1,200 words of meticulously documented professional history, posted with the headline, "On Professional Recognition and the True Cost of Taking Credit for Others' Work." I tagged every relevant business contact, every cultural organization I'd worked with, every diplomatic connection I'd made. Not vindictively, but professionally. These people deserved to know the truth about how their successful partnerships had actually been managed. Within 30 minutes, the response was overwhelming. Heinrich Müller was the first to comment. "Lydia, I had no idea. We always assumed these relationships were company-wide capabilities.
Your individual expertise explains so much about our successful partnerships." Marie-Claire Dubois followed. "This clarifies many questions we've had about cultural protocol inconsistencies. We look forward to working with you directly through the embassy." James Morrison's comment was longer. "The European Consortium has always been impressed with what we thought was Whitmore Construction's international team. Learning that these capabilities were primarily yours makes our decision to transition to direct embassy cooperation much easier." But the most significant response came from an unexpected source: Jennifer Walsh, senior reporter at the International Business Tribune, a publication read by diplomatic and business communities across 3 continents. "Lydia, would you be interested in expanding this story into a feature article about professional recognition in family businesses and the challenges faced by women in international trade? This pattern is more common than people realize, and your documentation is exceptionally thorough." I stared at her message. A feature article in IBT would reach thousands of business leaders, diplomats, and international trade professionals. It would become a case study, a reference point, a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing individual contributions. It would also ensure that the Whitmore family's treatment of me became a matter of international business community record. My phone was buzzing constantly now with calls from the Whitmores, but I ignored them. Instead, I replied to Jennifer Walsh. I'd be very interested in that conversation. When would be convenient? Her response was immediate. "How about this afternoon? This story needs to be told, and your documentation is some of the most thorough I've seen." I stared at Nathaniel, who had been reading the LinkedIn responses over my shoulder. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "None," I said. "They had every opportunity to do the right thing. They chose to see this as a power struggle instead of a recognition issue. If that's how they want to play it, then they can live with the consequences of that choice." "And how do you feel about those consequences?" I thought about it for a moment, watching the comments and shares accumulate on my post. Business leaders I'd never met were discussing the importance of individual recognition. Young professionals were sharing their own stories of unacknowledged contributions. Diplomatic contacts were expressing support for my transition to embassy work. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time in 18 years, I feel like people see me for who I actually am instead of who they needed me to be." My phone rang again. This time it was Patricia. I looked at the screen for a long moment, then declined the call. Because I was done explaining myself to people who had never bothered to understand me in the first place. The truth was out now, documented and witnessed by the international business community. And sometimes, the truth is the most powerful revenge of all. The International Business Tribune article went live 72 hours later with the headline, "The Hidden Architects: When Family Businesses Take Credit for Individual Expertise." It featured my story prominently, but expanded it into a broader examination of recognition patterns in family enterprises worldwide. Jennifer Walsh had interviewed 12 other professionals with similar experiences, sons, daughters, and in-laws, whose expertise had systematically been rebranded as family business capabilities. The article included expert commentary from business psychologists, legal experts on intellectual property, and diplomatic protocol specialists. But what made the article particularly powerful was the data. Jennifer had commissioned a study of family businesses that showed sudden international expansion cross-referenced with employment records and professional backgrounds of family members. The pattern was remarkably consistent, individual expertise being absorbed into corporate identity without formal recognition or compensation. My case became the primary example because I'd documented everything so thoroughly. The response was immediate and international.
But what surprised me most was how quickly other people came forward with their own stories about the Whitmore family's business practices. Sarah Kensington, a local architect who designed the European consulate building, revealed that she'd never been credited for her work on the project. Richard had presented her designs as Whitmore Construction's architectural vision to secure additional international contracts. David Chen, a translator who'd worked on several German business deals, came forward with emails showing how his cultural expertise had been repackaged as Richard's deep understanding of European business culture without acknowledgement or additional compensation. Even the catering staff from Cassandra's engagement party contacted Jennifer Walsh with stories about how the Whitmore family treated service providers, demanding free work, taking credit for others' ideas, and creating elaborate justifications for why they deserved discounts or complimentary services. A pattern was emerging, and it wasn't flattering. The story went viral in international business circles when the British Embassy officially announced my appointment as senior cultural liaison. The press release, drafted by Nathaniel's communications team, specifically mentioned my extensive experience in facilitating successful cross-cultural business relationships and my proven track record in international trade development. The announcement was picked up by diplomatic publications worldwide. Within a week, I was receiving interview requests from business schools, cultural organizations, and professional development groups. My LinkedIn profile showed 847 new connection requests from international trade professionals. Most tellingly, I started receiving job offers. The German investment group wanted to hire me as their North American cultural director. The Austrian development team offered me a consulting position for their global expansion projects. 3 different international law firms reached out about cultural expertise consulting roles. But the most significant offer came from an unexpected source. The United Nations Cultural Exchange Division wanted me to lead a new initiative on international business protocol development. Your case study, the UN representative explained during our video call, has highlighted a significant gap in how we understand and protect individual expertise in international business development. We'd like you to help us develop new standards for recognition and intellectual property protection in cultural liaison work. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to turn my personal experience into systemic change that could protect other professionals from what I'd experienced. Meanwhile, the consequences for the Whitmore family continued to unfold. Richard's construction company was forced to lay off 12 employees as contracts dried up. The business that had been thriving just a week earlier was suddenly struggling to meet basic payroll obligations. Patricia's social standing in Belmont society had evaporated completely. The women who had courted her friendship when she had diplomatic connections now crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. Cassandra and Jonathan postponed their wedding indefinitely. The Aldridge family, concerned about the negative publicity surrounding the Whitmores, was reportedly reconsidering the engagement entirely. Jonathan's father, whose shipping business depended heavily on maintaining positive relationships with international partners, couldn't afford to be associated with a family known for exploiting professional relationships. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the complete collapse of their carefully constructed public image. For 3 years, they'd built their reputation on being an internationally connected family with sophisticated cultural understanding. Business leaders had sought their advice, society figures had courted their friendship, and diplomatic families had included them in exclusive social circles. All of that was based on my work, and now everyone knew it. The Belmont Business Journal, which had featured Richard in a cover story just 6 months earlier, published a follow-up piece titled, "When Credit Goes Wrong, a Local Case Study." The article carefully dissected their previous claims of international expertise, contrasting them with documented evidence of my actual contributions.
Local business leaders who had partnered with Whitmore Construction began quietly reviewing their contracts and relationships. Several started requesting direct communication with the cultural specialists they'd been working with, only to discover that those specialists were no longer with the company. The unraveling was comprehensive and very public. But what affected me most personally was the silence. Not a single member of the Whitmore family had attempted to contact me since the Tribune article was published. No apology, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation. Just complete, utter silence. It told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed our relationship. As long as I was useful and compliant, I was family. The moment I demanded recognition and respect, I became the enemy. "How are you processing all this?" Nathaniel asked during one of our daily coffee meetings at the embassy. "Honestly, I feel like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart. These consequences, they're so much bigger than I expected." "Do you regret it?" I thought about that question carefully. The Whitmore family was facing financial ruin, social exile, and professional destruction. 3 weeks ago, they were one of the most successful families in Belmont. Now they were a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing individual contributions. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. But I never wanted to destroy them. I just wanted them to see me." "Sometimes," Nathaniel said gently, "the consequences of not seeing someone clearly are severe. That's not your fault, Lydia. That's the natural result of their choices." "I know, but it's still hard to watch."
It would be harder to watch you continue accepting less than you deserve. He was right. As difficult as it was to see the complete collapse of the family that had raised me, it was liberating to finally be valued for my actual contributions, rather than being grateful for charity. My new life was expanding in ways I'd never imagined possible. International recognition, professional opportunities, and most importantly, relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. The girl who had spent 18 years being nobody special had become someone whose expertise was sought after by governments, corporations, and international organizations. And for the first time in my life, I was excited about my future instead of just grateful for my present. 6 weeks after the Tribune article was published, I was in my new office at the embassy preparing for a video conference with the UN Cultural Exchange Division when my assistant knocked on my door. "Miss Ashworth, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your sister." I looked up from my notes about international recognition protocols, the very standards I was helping develop to protect other professionals from experiencing what I had. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Did she give her name?" "Cassandra Whitmore. She says it's urgent." I hadn't spoken to any member of the Whitmore family since the day I'd sent the transition email. 6 weeks of complete silence while their world imploded around them. I'd seen the headlines in the local business press, watched their social media accounts go dark one by one, observed from a distance as everything they'd built crumbled. But I hadn't heard their voices. "Send her in," I said finally. Cassandra looked terrible. Gone was the polished society princess who had dismissed me at her engagement party. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, she wore no makeup, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. But it was her eyes that shocked me most. Hollow, desperate, aged beyond her 28 years. "Hello, Cassandra." "Lydia." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for seeing me." She sat across from my desk, and for several moments we just looked at each other. I could see her taking in my office, the diplomatic credentials on the wall, the international business awards I had received in the past month, and the framed photograph of Nathaniel and me at a state dinner the week before. "Nice office," she said finally. "Thank you. I understand congratulations are in order for you as well. I heard you postponed the wedding."
Her face crumpled slightly. Jonathan broke off the engagement. His father, their business relationships, they couldn't afford to be associated with our family anymore. I felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? The question was sharp, bitter. Are you really sorry, or are you satisfied that you got your revenge? And there it was. The same fundamental misunderstanding that had driven us to this point. Cassandra, this was never about revenge. Wasn't it? You destroyed our family's business, our social standing, our future prospects. Dad's company is bankrupt. Mom hasn't left the house in 3 weeks. I've lost the man I love because of what you did. Cassandra, I said, my voice remaining calm despite the emotion in hers, I want you to think very carefully about what you just said. She turned to face me, confusion flickering across her features. You said your father worked his whole life to build that business. But which parts of that business did he actually build? What do you mean? I mean, specifically, what did Richard Whitmore personally do to create those international contracts, those cultural relationships, those diplomatic connections? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again.
Because according to every piece of documentation I provided to the Tribune and every interview Jennifer Walsh conducted with your business partners, your father's role was primarily administrative. The relationships, the cultural expertise, the international protocols, all of that came from me. But it was his company, built on whose foundation? Cassandra, in 3 years, I generated $4.2 million in business for Whitmore Construction. I facilitated every major international contract. I created every diplomatic relationship that elevated your family's social standing. I organized every cultural event that made your mother a social fixture in diplomatic circles. I stood up and walked around my desk to face her directly. So when you say I destroyed everything your father worked for, what exactly do you think he worked for? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I destroyed the fruits of my own labor that someone else had been taking credit for. Cassandra's composure finally cracked completely. But we're family. Family doesn't do this to each other. Family forgives. Family supports each other. You're absolutely right, I said, and for a moment hope flickered in her eyes. Family does support each other. Family does give credit where it's due. Family doesn't humiliate each other in public. Family doesn't exploit loyalty and twist it into obligation. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. So my question for you, Cassandra, is this. When exactly did you start treating me like family? She stared at me, speechless. Because from my perspective, I was treated like a useful employee with guilt-based job security. Someone whose contributions were valuable enough to take credit for, but not valuable enough to acknowledge. Someone who should be grateful for the privilege of building other people's success. That's not... We never meant... What you meant is irrelevant. What matters is what you did. And what you did was build your lives on my work while making me feel like I should thank you for the opportunity. I walked back to my desk and picked up a folder I'd been dreading this moment to share. Since you're here, there's something you should know. Something that might help you understand why your father's business collapsed so quickly. I handed her the folder. These are copies of contracts and correspondence from your major business partners over the past 3 years. She opened it with trembling hands. Look at the language. Notice how many of them specifically mention working with the cultural specialist, the international relations expert, the diplomat's daughter. Not Whitmore Construction's team, not your father's expertise, me, personally.
I watched her face as she read through document after document, each one making it clear that the business relationships weren't with the company, they were with me. Heinrich Mueller's contract renewal from last year pointed out, look at Clause 7. It specifically states that cultural liaison services must be provided by Miss Lydia Hawthorn or an equivalent expert with comparable qualifications and experience. Her hands were shaking now. The European Consortium's letter of intent, page 3, it explicitly mentions that their investment decision was contingent on continued access to the cultural expertise that has made this partnership successful. I don't understand, she whispered. You don't understand because your father never showed you these documents. Because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging that his international success wasn't actually his. I took the folder back and set it on my desk. So when you ask why your family's business collapsed so quickly after I left, the answer is simple. There was no business without me. There were just contracts that required my personal expertise, relationships depended on my cultural knowledge, and a reputation built entirely on my professional capabilities. We really didn't know, she said quietly. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. Because knowing would have required acknowledging that the charity case you'd taken in had become the most valuable asset your family possessed. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. What can we do? How can we fix this? And that was the question I'd both hoping and dreading for. Cassandra, I said gently, what do you think needs to be fixed? Our relationship, our family, the damage that's been done. The damage to whom? She paused, confusion flickering across her face again. To all of us? Cassandra, what damage was done to me? Another long pause. I guess your feelings were hurt? You felt unappreciated? I shook my head sadly. Even now, you still don't see it. See what? That I didn't lose anything when I left your family. I gained everything. Professional recognition, international opportunities, relationships built on mutual respect instead of obligation. The only damage done to me was the 18 years I spent believing I should be grateful for being undervalued.
So, when you ask how to fix this, I continued, the real question is, are you asking how to repair the damage done to me, or how to recover what your family lost when you stopped being able to exploit my expertise? She stared at me, and I could see the exact moment she understood the distinction. I see, she said quietly. Do you? Do you really? She nodded slowly. You don't need us anymore. I never needed you, Cassandra. I just thought I did because you taught me to believe that loyalty and gratitude were the same thing. She stood up to leave, then turned back one final time. For what it's worth, she said, I'm sorry. Not for the consequences. I understand those now. But I'm sorry we never saw you clearly. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from any member of the Whitmore family. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out at the embassy grounds. 26 years of searching for a family that would value me, and I'd finally found it, in the father I'd never known I had, in the professional community that recognized my worth, in the relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Some bridges, once burned, reveal that they were never really bridges at all. They were just chains, disguised as connections. 2 years later, I stood in the main auditorium of the International Business Institute in Geneva, Virginia, looking out at an audience of 800 diplomatic professionals, cultural liaisons, and international trade specialists from 43 countries. The banner behind me read, Protecting Individual Expertise in Cross-Cultural Business Development, the Ashworth Protocols. Yes, they'd named the international recognition standards after me. Professional exploitation in family and small business environments often masquerades as opportunity.
Young professionals are told they should be grateful for the chance to contribute their expertise, while their contributions are systematically rebranded as organizational capabilities. The audience was completely silent, taking notes, recording my words. In the front row, I could see representatives from the United Nations, the International Chamber of Commerce, and the European Business Council. These were the people who would implement the new standards across their organizations. The Ashworth Protocols established 3 fundamental protections. First, individual expertise must be credited to the individual regardless of organizational structure. Second, professionals who generate business relationships through personal cultural knowledge retain rights to those relationships. Third, compensation must reflect the actual value generated, not the perceived generosity of the opportunity provider. After my presentation, during the reception, I was approached by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, director of the International Professional Ethics Board. Lydia, your work is already having impact beyond what we expected. We've had 17 family businesses voluntarily restructure their recognition policies to comply with the Ashworth Protocols. They want to get ahead of potential litigation. That's encouraging, I said, though I hope the goal is genuine recognition, not just legal compliance. Either way, it's progress. Your documentation methodologies have become the standard for professionals who want to protect their contributions. Business schools are teaching the Ashworth approach to their students. It was surreal hearing my name associated with institutional change, but it was also deeply satisfying to know that other young professionals wouldn't have to experience what I had. Dr. Ashworth? A young woman approached us hesitantly. I'm Maria Santos from the Brazilian Cultural Ministry. I just wanted to thank you. Your protocols helped me secure proper recognition for trade relationships I'd been building for 3 years. My family's import business had been taking credit for my expertise, but when I documented everything using your methodology, you got the partnership and recognition you deserved, I finished. Partnership, profit sharing, and formal acknowledgement. But more importantly, I got respect. My family finally sees me as a professional asset rather than a helpful daughter. Stories like Maria's reached me weekly now. Young professionals who had used the Ashworth Protocols to document their contributions, demand recognition, and establish proper business relationships with their families or employers. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. As I was leaving the reception, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn message from Heinrich Müller, the German businessman who had been one of my first international connections through Whitmore Construction. Dr. Ashworth, I saw your presentation streaming online. Remarkable work. I wanted you to know that we've implemented the Ashworth Protocols across all our subsidiary companies. After working with you, we realized how often we'd been taking credit for individual expertise without proper recognition. Your influence has made us better business partners. Better business partners. It struck me that this was what I'd always wanted from the Whitmore family. Not gratitude for charity, but partnership based on mutual value. My phone rang as I walked through Geneva's diplomatic quarter toward my hotel. Nathaniel's name appeared on the screen. Dad? I said, still smiling at how natural that word had become. Lydia, I just watched a presentation online. Absolutely brilliant. Your mother would be so proud. Thank you. How are things in Belmont?
Quiet. Though you should know, I received an interesting call yesterday. Oh? Richard Whitmore contacted the embassy. He wanted to arrange a meeting with me. I stopped walking. About what? He says he wants to make amends. He's apparently been following your international work and understands now what the family lost when they, as he put it, failed to recognize your contributions. What did you tell him? I told him that any amends to be made would need to be made to you, not to me. I'm not the one who spent 18 years being undervalued. I resumed walking, processing this information. Richard reaching out, after 2 years, only after my international recognition had made my worth undeniable. Did he mention anything specific? He said he wanted to apologize, publicly if necessary. He also mentioned something about establishing a scholarship in your name at Meridian University for students studying international relations. A scholarship? Apparently, he's learned some things about proper recognition since your departure. I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it anymore.
Too little, too late. But I'm glad he's learning. Are you interested in meeting with him? I thought about it as I walked past the Swiss diplomatic buildings, their flags representing dozens of countries where the Ashworth protocols were now being implemented. No, I said finally. I'm not interested in relitigating the past. If he wants to make amends, he can start by treating his current employees with the respect they deserve. Fair enough. Though the scholarship offer was serious, he apparently has the funds available since the business has been liquidated. That caught my attention. The business was liquidated? Completely. He couldn't rebuild the international relations, and the local market wasn't sufficient to sustain operations. He's apparently working as a project manager for someone else's construction company now. I felt a complex mix of emotions: sadness for the complete collapse of what had once been a thriving business, but also validation that my contributions had been as essential as I documented. And the rest of the family? Patricia has found work as an administrative assistant at the hospital. Cassandra moved to Atlanta, apparently found work with a marketing firm there. I believe she's dating someone new. Good for her. I hope she's happy. And surprisingly, I meant it. The anger and hurt that had driven my actions 2 years ago had transformed into something else. Understanding, maybe, or simply acceptance that some people can only see clearly in hindsight. Lydia, Nathaniel said, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've built. Not just professionally, but personally. You turned a painful experience into positive change for thousands of professionals worldwide. I had good guidance, and more importantly, I finally understood my own worth. After we hung up, I sat in a small cafe near Lake Geneva, working on my next presentation for the UN Cultural Exchange Division, but my mind kept returning to the conversation about the Whitmore family. 2 years ago, I was Lydia Hawthorn, the charity case who should be grateful for opportunities. Today, I was Dr. Lydia Ashworth, architect of international recognition standards that were protecting professional expertise across 3 continents. The girl who had been told she was nobody special had become someone whose work was studied in business schools, whose methodologies were implemented by governments, whose name was synonymous with professional recognition and respect. But more important than any external validation, I had learned to value myself independently of other people's approval. I opened my laptop and began typing my next presentation. Building Professional Identity Beyond Family Expectations, a framework for individual excellence. Because the most powerful transformation hadn't been my career or my international recognition, it had been learning that I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was worthy of respect. I could simply insist on it. And when people chose not to provide it, I could build a life without them. A life where respect wasn't charity, where recognition wasn't a gift, and where my expertise belonged to me. At 28, I finally understood what I should have known at 8. My worth wasn't determined by other people's ability to see it. It was determined by my refusal to accept anything less than what I deserved. And what I deserved was everything I'd built for myself: professional recognition, meaningful relationships, and most importantly, a life where being valued was the baseline, not the aspiration. Some families are born from blood. Others are built from respect. I'd finally found mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.